Welcome to the Powering Affordable, Reliable Technology Energy Program webinar, also known as PART. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Christopher McLean, your Assistant Administrator for Rural Utility Service. Chris?
All right. Thank you very much, Scott, and welcome everybody who has joined us today. To those who are returning visitors, welcome. I've got some new information for you, which we'll have on the up front. And for those of first-time visitors, thank you very much for joining us, and we appreciate your interest in the PART program. And we will also cover our greatest hits as we have in the last couple of sessions. So we're right at the halfway point of our Wednesday webinar deep dives into the Powering Affordable, Reliable Technology Energy Program. And thank you for taking part. And this is your invitation to become part of Rural America's energy future. So we have a little bit expanded agenda as we have. So I'm going to go over a couple of items that are new to our presentation here. So we'll have the hierarchy of authorities, some important reminders and clarifications, thanks to your efforts to give us FAQs, some helpful resources available to you, some that you have requested in previous webinars. And then we'll go through the overview, maximum and minimums, loan types, loan forgiveness dates, performance periods, eligible entities. And we're going to give some special attention this time to eligible entities, eligible service areas, eligible loan purposes, and project eligibility. And then we will open the floor for Q&A. So first and foremost, I want to emphasize this in a very clear and straightforward way is to remind everybody of the hierarchy of authorities. These Wednesday webinars are informal conversational means for us to be able to communicate with you. Again, we appreciated the conversational nature of these presentations and Q&As and back and forth. And it's our efforts to be able to explain the PART NOFO. Applicants are reminded that the statutory and regulatory language take precedence over anything that I may say or missay on these webinars. The Inflation Reduction Act, and by reference Section 317 of the Rural Electrification Act, and other statutes as well as the PART NOFO, Notice of Funding Availability, which is effectively the regulation controlling this funding opportunity, as well as the referenced regulations in the NOFO, really are your premier authoritative sources. And I have some good news. We have just published earlier this week our first set of frequently asked questions, FAQs, and those FAQs were vetted, as I had mentioned in previous sessions, that in these live Q&As, we love them. They're very helpful. I think they, again, are intended to be conversational, but as can happen, someone who asks a question may have one thing in mind, and the person who answers the question may have a different thing in mind, and we could be not exactly have a meeting of the minds of what we're talking about. So we do ask everyone to make sure that they put their questions into the Q&A, and then we will distill them down into FAQs. And the FAQs have been carefully reviewed and debated by our senior staff here. A big thanks to Don and to Emily and to Amy, who have helped us vet those, as well as our counsel in the Office of General Counsel has given a final careful view of the FAQs. So the FAQs and the application guide, those are vetted documents. And so again, keep in mind, nothing that we say on this webinar, or frankly, nothing that we say in the guidance documents, can overrule something that is very clearly stated in the funding notice or the statute, or for that matter, the Constitution. So we'll go to the next slide. So I want to thank everybody who gave us questions so that we could put them through our FAQ, frequently asked question vetting process, because it's a very, very useful tool for us to try to understand issues that are on the minds of our potential applicants. and also gives me a chance to be able to fine tune my presentation. I myself watched my own couple of presentations that we have since published on our website, and and it helps me realize the things that are on your mind. So we always try to fine tune and highlight things. So here are a few items that I wanted to highlight right at the get-go because they seem to be a consistent theme. And then even in listening to my own presentation, perhaps I have not done as good of a job as I should have in highlighting what is on the slides and what is in the funding notice. So one of the key areas that keeps coming up is this issue of operating utility. So let me be very, very clear. A part applicant must meet the definition of an operating utility. Now, I know we have a lot of developers who participated in the PACE program and who have been listening in on these webinars. And so this is not to say there isn't a role for developers in the PART program, but developers that themselves do not meet the definition of operating utility, they would not be eligible to apply directly for PART financing. However, developers can partner with an operating utility to develop, to construct, or even operate an eligible facility. However, the applicant slash owner slash borrower of the project must be an operating utility. And a little bit later in the presentation, we'll dig a little bit deeper into the definition of operating utility. And so just please bear in mind that you need to be an operating utility to be an eligible applicant under the funding notice. The other issue that has been at least frequently arise in the FAQs and some of the questions that we've had in our live Q&As is I need to be, again, very, very clear that the output of any part project must be electricity. We are the Rural Utility Service, as the successor agency to the Rural Electrification Administration, and much of our work is under the Rural Electrification Act, as is Section 317. So our end product is to be financing electricity. So the mere production of fuel, whether it's a biogas or a thermal fuel, or the production of heat that doesn't get converted into electricity, even if it is to be used or sold to a third party to generate electricity, is not sufficient. So the project itself, put forward by an operating utility, must have as its output electricity, not just fuel for electricity. So go to the next slide. On storage projects as well, this is a common theme in the questions, some more details. So you'll see these issues as well addressed in the FAQs, which I will get to in a little bit here. So I just want to highlight that for storage projects, eligible applicants must demonstrate that the storage device is charged by an eligible energy source. As we have discussed, it can be any one of the 5 eligible sources under 317: hydro, geothermal, biomass, wind, or solar renewable power source, right? So electricity from those sources of energy can charge the storage system or the battery. And the operating utility would need to demonstrate in their application, and they're, again, assert at least with some level of demonstration that they can demonstrate by physical, contractual, or other clear evidence that the energy storage system is charged by renewable power from a hydro, geothermal, or biomass, wind, or solar renewable source. We had posed to us an example. If I do a battery storage system that is standby power for my solar system, but the battery storage is being charged up by natural gas, well, that would not be an eligible purpose under the funding notice or under the statute, because Section 317 is tied to those five sources, as is the NOFO. So it has to be charged by one of those five: hydro, geothermal, biomass, wind, or solar. Even though, as we'll get to a little bit later, we are not financing new construction for wind or solar. And again, just another reminder, please remember the hierarchy authorities, the Constitution, the relevant statutes, the NOFO, the regulations that are incorporated by reference are your preeminent authorities. So things that are inconsistent that you either see in lower ranked authorities, if it's inconsistent, it is the statutes and the NOFO that will comply, that will apply both for you as potential applicants as well as for us as an agency. Now, the vetted guidance documents, such as our application guide or our published FAQs, they can be helpful, but they cannot override the requirements of the statute or the NOFO. And our conversational webinar presentations are designed to help you think through your potential application and think about the NOFO and options that might be available to you. But it is impossible in this conversational format for us to anticipate every comprehensive in and out and footnote that might be lying in the provisions that you're interested in. Just like the live Q&As, they can be prone to misunderstanding by the speaker or the listener. So we'll go to the next slide. All right, so if those of you who were with us last week, we did have a question like, well, are we going to have a LOI template? So what we have done to be able to respond to your requests, we have posted on our website, and it is a kind of a guidance document here that can give you some formatting ideas about what the letter of interest can look like. So why don't we scroll? And again, this is a tool to help you, but remember, you are 100% responsible for ensuring that everything that is requested in the NOFO for LOIs needs to be able to fit into your LOI. And so we just try to give you some guidance on some of the key elements that we need to be able to have a comprehensible LOI for us, because we will be using the LOIs to be able to sort and screen projects and to put them into a funding queue so that we can proceed to an invitation to proceed. So anyway, we're not going to go line by line through this, but it's there, it's on the website, and the link is on this PowerPoint slide. But if you just go to the RUS Part website, you will be able to find that, and I hope that is helpful to you. And then we also had some questions here about the SF424. So you're going to need, as you go to grants.gov, you're going to need to be able to have both an LOI and the SF424. And I'll describe this document more as like a little bit of a cheat sheet. So we tried to anticipate some of the questions you might have. You will have to, we advise you to be prepared with this document, but you will also have to likely upload the data into the grants.gov portal. And what we've done here is we try to give you some helpful hints here on things that are, that are going to be asked as you go through your submission process. So what is our official agency name? Are you RUS? Are you Rural Development? Are you USDA? So the agency name, which we'll see here in line 10, is Rural Utility Service. The funding opportunity in the catalog of federal domestic assistance is Powering Available Reliable Technology Part Energy Programs. That's where you would enter it in 11 and 12. The funding code is there. So we also have marked some of the spaces that are not applicable as NA for you. So you could just insert NA in there. And then at the very bottom, there's kind of a question, which frankly we had to research a little bit ourselves, but as to whether a certain regulation applies. whether this executive order 12372 applies, and it would not. So you just check the do not apply list on the form, and then in the portal if that's one of the questions that you have asked. In both cases, you have opportunities to upload documents. So you can upload, even in the 424, when they have the title description, you have an opportunity to upload a document. Also, in the geographic questions, you could upload documents. So that should help you get ready when the gate comes up, so that you can get your applications in, or your LOIs, your letters of interest, in promptly. And then the other new resource that we have available is the list of the FAQs. So why don't we just give a quick preview of what the FAQ document looks like in the format. Now we've taken, again, much thanks to our listening audience out there. We took the FAQs, or the questions that were posed, distilled some of them down because there were a number of duplications to their essence, and you can see we have a wide range of issues that were addressed in the FAQs, and so we hope that that's going to be useful to you as you figure out where you fit and what's your application, so that we can maximize your chances that your applications are eligible under the and again, I say application, I'm intending to say an example of the conversational nature of this. I'm intending to say your letters of interest, that your letters of interest make the grade. So hopefully this will be helpful to you. And as we have additional topics that are not covered by this list, we will pursue to pound out some answers and vet them with our colleagues and make them available to you. So keep an eye on that RUS PART website. You'll find a lot of useful material, and you will find video versions of the recorded versions of these presentations as they get adapted to be compliant and have things like subtitles, etc. All right, so we can go to the next slide. And we are now to our greatest hits section, but there'll be some a little bit added emphasis as we go into these overview slides. So the Rural Utility Service is soliciting letters of interest. And again, I apologize for lapsing into saying applications. The letter of interest is your precursor to being invited to submit a full application. So it's letters of interest for partially forgivable loans to support new electric infrastructure investments under the Powering Affordable, Reliable Technology Energy Program, otherwise known as PART. And RUS is making approximately $410 million in appropriated budget authority funding available under Section 22001 of the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. Now, I want to make one point here, because I did have a little bit of a misspeak. That $410 million is budget authority. It is not the total loan program. So if you calculate in context of what the budget is, we could actually support a substantially larger amount of loans, because up to 40% of the loans are potentially forgivable. So as that $410 million of budget authority can be leveraged up fairly dramatically to close to $1 billion or more of actual new investments supported by loans and forgiveness. So it's a bigger program than I had suggested in a previous presentation. I apologize for that misstatement. So we'll go to the next slide. PART loan funds will be made available to qualified PART applicants, again, operating utilities, to finance power generation projects from hydro, geothermal, and/or biomass energy sources. So unlike the PACE program, we will not be providing construction finance for wind or solar. largely because we had a substantial amount of solar projects that were approved, and the timing of getting projects through all the clearances, we have to be very, very realistic because we do have a time deadline on the availability of these funds, which we'll discuss in a minute. So, and or energy storage systems that are charged by any of the 5 eligible power supply sources under Section 317 of the Rural Electrification Act: hydro, geothermal, biomass, wind, or solar power sources. So even though we're not financing generation for wind or solar, if you have a storage, battery storage, or energy storage project charged up by wind or solar, well, that storage system could be eligible even though it's charged by wind or solar, and we won't be financing the wind or solar construction. And of course, the PART program is designed here to bring rural power supply up and rural power costs down. And that's because we require in the NOFO that you demonstrate that there are consumer benefits to you getting an award under the PART program. It's an important part of the affordability quotient for us. Here are the maximums and minimums and the rate and loan terms for this program. A minimum amount for any individual award is $1 million, and the maximum amount is $100 million. However, if you have received a prior PACE award, that value of that PACE award will count against the $100 million ceiling, and that $100 million and $1 million is inclusive of your forgiveness portion. The rates and terms are set at the municipal rate that RUS publishes on a regular basis. You can find the municipal rate on the RUS website, and the rate that is on the website is the rate that is in effect today if you were to draw funds. So you need to build into your planning and to your financial models, the expectation that the municipal rates may not be the same today as they will be in the future when you want to draw funds. And again, anybody who has that ability to predict the future interest rates, you are a very, very lucky person and probably a very rich person. So the municipal rates are based on an index that we use, and we set them, and you'll find them on the RUS website related to the term of the loan. Now, the term of the PART loan are tied to these following characteristics. One, the useful life of the equipment financed, the term of the seller's power purchase agreement, where that's applicable, the lease term of any leased land, or 35 years, whichever is the shortest. So if you have a project that has maybe a 50-year useful life, let's say it's a big hydro facility, well, I can only finance under the statute 35 years, not the full 50 years. If you have a project that has a useful life of 30 years, but you're leasing the land under that project for that project, and that lease is only 20 years, well, I will only be able to make a 20-year loan because we have to go to the shortest term of those criteria so that we match up our collateral with our lending. So go to the next slide. Loan forgiveness is pegged at up to 40%. In the PART program, we've adopted a significant streamlining effort here compared to our predecessor PACE program. Instead of having 3 separate levels of potential forgiveness, we have settled in on one level of up to 40% and eliminated the different types of hoops you would have to jump through to be able to demonstrate that you're eligible for a particular level of forgiveness. If you're eligible for the program, and you can request up to 40% forgiveness, what you request doesn't necessarily dictate what we will offer. but we will offer no more than 40%. Now, depending on the number of applications or LOIs that we receive, projects that eventually get invited to submit a full application, we are anticipating that awards can be made probably in spring, summer of 2027. If I get small turnout to this funding cycle, well, then it might be sooner. If I get a ginormous turnout, well, it might be a little delayed, but that is our target, is to start making awards spring or summer 2027. The performance period must be completed and funds must be dispersed before September 30th, 2031. Why? Well, that is a statutory requirement under the Inflation Reduction Act. And the agency will set a last day for advance deadline in your loan agreement that is substantially prior to September 30th, 2031, so we can get those funds out before the end of the fiscal year and very comfortably meet our statutory obligations. The important point here is as you're planning your park projects, you must be able to get your projects completed so that I can disperse the funds to you by September 30th, 2031, because by the operation of the statute, absent any future changes by Congress, these funds will just evaporate at the stroke of midnight on September 30th, 2031, whether you're ready or not to receive them. We'll go next slide. And we have two types of loans that we are offering. So the first one is project loans that will be used to finance specific eligible projects where the award will be secured through a senior security interest on the project's assets and revenues that are generated from the project assets. So in other words, you're only pledging the particular part project to secure this loan. And as a project loan, awards will finance up to 75% of the total capitalized costs of the project. Awardees will be required to provide at least 25% of the project's total capitalized cost in the form of cash or equity investments, which are not derived from debt instruments. So you can't go meet your equity requirements by borrowing money from somebody else. With one proviso here, however, the agency may utilize its authority under Section 306F of the Rural Electrification Act to finance up to 100% of costs for projects that benefit substantially underserved trust areas. So Section 306F is a special discretionary authority that the administrator has to consider to give waivers or to consider special conditions for projects that serve substantially underserved trust areas. So what is a substantially underserved trust area, or a SUTA, as we like to say? Well, typically those are tribal communities. In the lower 48, they might be tribal reservations. In Alaska, there's vast regions of Alaska that fit the SUTA definition. In Hawaii, the Hawaiian homelands fit that definition. And in our Compact of Free Association states, a number of those, and the territories of the United States, some of them also fit the SUTA. So you can look at Section 306F of the Rural Electrification Act to see if you serve a SUTA area. And there the administrator does reserve the right to offer more than 75% financing for a project loan. Now, system loans, that's the type of lending that we typically have here at the Rural Utility Service under the Rural Electrification Act. System loans are available to eligible currently operating electric utilities, and the part applicant will provide, if it has not already, because it's already an RUS borrower, with a perfected senior lien on all of its existing assets, both real and personal, including intangible personal property, as well as after acquired property. In other words, we get a first lien, or if you have existing lenders, a shared first lien on all of the assets of your utility system. And Membership has its privileges if you are eligible for a system loan. The agency will consider financing up to 100% of the total project cost included in your LOI and your application. Why? Well, because we'll have a lien on all of the assets and all of the revenues of your system. So we're making a bigger underwriting decision based on the coverage of all of your assets, not just the assets of the project. And project loans are also eligible. I'm sorry, system loans, excuse me, system loans are also eligible for financing during construction. Again, that's a discretionary authority with the agency if you are financially feasible to do so, but we can entertain progress payments while you're constructing. Now, the project payments can only be for the loan portion of your award. For system loans and for project loans, your forgiveness comes once your project is complete, operational, validated by RUS staff. In other words, the forgiveness is your reward for completing your project and having it operate as promised and delivering the electricity as promised. Go to the next slide. Okay, so here's where I do want to spend a little bit more time. Having reviewed my previous presentations, you would tend to jump into the A, B, C, D, E, F, G portions and not put enough emphasis, even though it's been in each one of our presentations on this first sentence here. So, to be an eligible applicant, the Rural Utility Service will accept letters of interest and then, if invited to apply, applications from operating utilities as described below. So that operating utility could be a for-profit organization, an investor-owned utility. It could be a state or local government, for example, a municipal utility. It could be a tribal utility. It could be a utility operated by an Alaska Native corporation. Or it could be a nonprofit utility or an electric cooperative or other certificated electric utilities. Now, we'll go next. So you have to be both. You have to be both an operating utility and meet one of those other criterias. And here is right out of the NOFA what the definition of the operating utility is. So we'll spend a little bit of time going through this and parsing this section because I think it has been a focus for a lot of our FAQs. An operating utility is an electric service provider. So again, you have to be in the electric business. You don't, if you're a water or a telecom utility and you're not an electric service provider, well, you need to be electric service provider. So you need a utility and electric service provider that is granted a certificate of convenience and necessity or its equivalent, depending on whatever terms your regulator uses, from a regulator with jurisdiction over the applicant to serve a specific geographic territory or group of distribution utilities, and the applicant has a commitment to serve consumers in that area or areas. All right, so the regulator could be a state regulator, it could be a federal regulator for that matter. For example, if you're maybe a large G&T, you might be regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. But you need to meet each one of these elements to be an operating utility. Now, the next sentence addresses a unique situation for rural electric cooperatives because some states do not exercise direct regulatory authority over cooperatives, and in those states, the cooperative board is deemed to be the regulator. So, where a cooperative does not have a separate regulator, an operating utility is an electric service provider that has authority to serve specific geographic territory or group of distribution utilities by operation of state or federal law. Now, you can be an operating utility anywhere in the United States and be eligible to apply for the PART program, even if you're applying to provide service in an area that is outside of your normal service territory. However, just understand that for you to eventually draw funds from this program, you have to obtain all of the necessary regulatory authorities that have jurisdiction over the area you seek to serve. So you don't just have to be a regulatory, you don't have to just be an operating utility for an area where you already have regulatory authority to serve, but you will eventually need to make sure that all of those regulatory permissions are received for you to actually get the funding after the application process is complete. All right. So again, you can be any form of electric utility, but you do have to be an operating utility pursuant to this definition. And you also may be a newly formed utility that meets this definition, um, and could still be eligible because you have been granted the certificate of convenience and necessity. And you could be a young operating utility and you're just getting started. So that's something to bear in mind as well. Okay, another key part of the application is to be sure that you are serving eligible service areas. And the statute, Section 317 of the Rural Electrification Act, provides that the renewable energy that is eligible under 317 and under this funding notice, um, certainly for charging, and then for 3 of the 5 listed in 317, the electricity generators stored from facilities shall be provided to rural and non-rural residents in eligible services and service areas. So we are the rural utility service. Our mission is to serve rural America. So we have in the NOFO a rural predominance rule. So the rural percentage of the service territory, except for current or former Rural Electrification Act borrowers, is that a minimum rural percentage of your chosen methodology of your service area must be at least 50%. So 50% plus 1 customer is sufficient to be able to establish your rurality of your service territory. Now, the rural percentage will be calculated by the method of your choosing. So you can either use the population of your service area and being able to split them between rural and non-rural populations to people, people who live in rural and non-rural areas, or by the number of meters in the rural and non-rural areas. So we will look at that. And if you are seeking to serve a service territory or a portion of a service territory that meets that 50% plus 1 test, then you will be eligible. Again, the absurd example that I have used in previous webinars, that even if you're in a rural area and you want to generate power to serve Chicago, Illinois, well, Chicago, Illinois, Cook County is not going to be 51 or 50% plus 1 rural. So that's not going to be eligible, even if you are generating the power from downstate Illinois. You have to be able to serve at least 50% of the project's beneficiaries to be identified and classified as rural. Go to the next slide. So there's a special rule. Again, membership has its privileges. The service areas of current or former RUS or REA borrowers under the Rural Electrification Act are deemed to be rural under this notice for those borrowers' own service territory. So if you borrowed money or formerly borrowed money or a current borrower under the Rural Electrification Act, your entire service area will be deemed to be rural. If the part applicant is not a current or former RUS or REA borrower, a rural determination will be conducted by RUS to be able to identify the service territory where electricity from the facilities to be financed by part award would be delivered and consumed, and to further identify those areas within the service territory that are rural. So two big purposes under this program, as you've probably already gathered, and I know I say this over and over, but I do it on purpose for emphasis. The energy generation we are willing to finance needs to be a renewable energy resource, but for the purposes of this NOFO, it's an energy conversion system which is fueled by hydropower, biomass, a geothermal source of energy. But that conversion system needs to convert that energy into electricity. So we'll be willing to finance electricity generated from biomass, geothermal, or hydropower. And then energy storage systems that are in support of those three are eligible, but also energy storage systems that are charged by wind or solar, which we would not be financing, are eligible to be part of this program. So a facility capable of accepting energy, storing the energy for a period of time, and then later releasing that stored energy in support of an eligible renewable energy resource under 317 of the Rural Electrification Act. Again, I want to emphasize those energy storage systems need to be charged by one of the 5 eligible technologies. And you can demonstrate that physically, contractually, or by another other method that is auditable and demonstrable, so that we can make sure that we're complying with the rules of the funding notice and the statute. Go to the next slide. So eligible loan purposes, right? We are expecting you to generate electricity either for your own utility customers. Let's say you're a distribution utility and you want to generate some geothermal sourced, geothermal powered electricity for your own customers. And again, you're an operating utility, you got your certificated, certificate of convenience necessity or comparable document that says you have the right and obligation to serve that population. You don't need a power purchase agreement because your off-takers are your own customers and you are an operating utility. So if you are a generation and transmission utility or a generating utility, well, we need to have a power purchase agreement to be able to demonstrate who is the beneficiary of the power you are producing, and for us to be able to make a underwriting decision on the financial feasibility of your arrangement with your off-taker. Because the power purchase agreement is a binding agreement executed between the part applicant and an off-taker, under which the off-taker agrees to purchase and receive from the part applicant the electrical capacity associated energy produced by the project at a predetermined price and term, right? So I can look at that PPA and I can make a fairly good calculation. The PPA is in place for 20 years. The PPA is going to pay at this predetermined price, and the PPA is going to be able to finance this quantity of power, do a little bit mathematics, and I'll be able to determine what the financial feasibility, or a key part of the financial feasibility of that project. So it's very important for us to have the PPA when the off-taker is not the entity that's generating the power. And that entity, again, has to be an operating electric utility. The PPA may also include other transactions or costs, such as the selling and purchasing of environmental attributes or ancillary services, such as voltage regulation, synchronization, contingency reserves, and other essential needed elements to be able to deliver the power to your off-taker. The other important part of the power purchase agreement is that it allows me, or our agency, not me personally, but allows our agency to be able to look at who the off-taker and analyze their service territory, or who the off-taker is buying that power for, to be able to determine that it meets our rurality test. So the power purchase agreement has two important purposes for the agency in analyzing your LOIs and applications. Tells me financial feasibility, or is an important element of financial feasibility, and also tells me intended beneficiaries so that we can ensure compliance with the statute and the regulation. So projects can be developed by eligible applicants developing new renewable power generation eligible under the notice from a renewable energy source and an ESS, energy storage system for use by off-takers through a PPA, again, or similar financial guarantees that ensure financial feasibility. So, we have seen financial arrangements that are comparable to a PPA, but if you choose something other than a traditional PPA, please be sure to explain it to us so that we can understand it. And the projects need to be new facilities that generate electricity from the eligible rural renewable energy resources, again, geothermal, biomass, hydro, including facilities that store or transmit electricity that support such assets. However, RUS will not approve financing facilities that violate the terms of a part applicant's existing wholesale power contracts, right? We will not interfere with your existing contracts that you might have with your G&T. So we want to make sure that you let us know that it doesn't violate the terms of your pre-existing agreements. And let me address one more thing, because we did get a few questions related to investing in restoring, resurrecting, or extending the life of an existing facility. And that could be eligible, right? Because it's new investment in new construction, but you have to demonstrate that we're getting an added increment of electricity out of that investment. It can't be simple O&M, operation and maintenance investments to keep things humming along the way they always have. But you have to be able to demonstrate that your investment to, let's say, resurrect a retired hydro facility to produce electricity again, well, that would be the new investment would support that added increment of power. Or if you are going to extend the life of a facility beyond its, let's say, regulatory deadline, and this will facilitate the extension, we could consider that added electricity as being part of your project. So it doesn't have to be from the ground up, brand new greenfield investment. Certainly, we did contemplate bringing back to life some projects that may have been sitting dormant. And I know we've had a number of questions related to dormant hydro facilities. Can added investment be put in and qualify as new investment? And yes, because it is new to that system, and it would be taking something that's producing no power to having it produce power. And so that would be an added increment. So that could work for a potential part LOI and eventual application. Go to the next slide. You can also include new linear facilities, including microgrids and equipment that's necessary to operate the project, including but not limited to transformers, transmission, distribution facilities that are needed to export, transmit, and deliver power from generating facilities to the off-taker. Now, it needs to be necessary. It needs to be part of that project. So if you need to invest into a new transmission line to take the power, the electricity that you're generating in one place to deliver to your off-taker in another place, well, you can include that into your cost and could get reimbursement for that. But if it's just a random transmission line somewhere on your network that's not linear from your project, well, that would not be eligible. Also, the upgrading of existing linear facilities and equipment that are necessary to operate the project, including but not limited to, same thing, transformers, transmission, distribution. So if you're going to upgrade your transmission line or upgrade your transformers to something new, then that could be included, because as long as it's necessary to facilitate the delivery of your part financed generated electricity to your off-taker or your customers. Go to the next slide. Okay, the project may include new construction for the three eligibles, or energy storage systems for charged by the five eligible technologies. You can mix and match. They may be co-located and operate interconnectively, or they may be separated and constructed separately, as long as they meet the fundamental definitions of the renewable energy resource or the energy storage system. And the renewable energy resource and energy storage system must be installed so that the renewable energy resource can provide energy and any ancillary services for resale to rural and non-rural residents located in the eligible service areas. Again, to highlight another key point, the RUS will not use part funding, or frankly, we will not use our normal Rural Electrification Act funding to finance merchant power. We say, okay, we're just going to generate power and put it on the grid and take whatever price is coming our way. You have to be able to serve your own utility customers, or serve under a power purchase agreement to an off-taker. So next slide. Applicants can request interconnection costs and other costs associated being able to deliver the eligible renewable energy resource and or the energy service energy system energy storage system to off-takers, including related microgrid investments. So successful applicants may also recover a portion of their capitalized pre-application costs pursuant to 7 CFR Part 1767 and the NOFO. However, if you don't make it across the finish line, those costs are all borne by yourself. But there are some things, like some engineering costs, that can be recovered if you do cross the finish line and get approved finally. Applicants may include in their application costs specified in 7 CFR 1710.106, including interest during construction. So let's say you're a project financed project, you're going to need interim financing to be able to construct your part eligible project. Well, again, when you cross the finish line, get finally approved, you should be able to submit those reasonable, I highlight reasonable interest during construction charges pursuant to our reg. And then if you need forbearance, let's say due to tax credits, I need to be extremely clear here, because this is a relatively new requirement since we launched the PACE program and had started doing renewable energy projects many years ago. But requests for forbearance periods will not be entertained if such period exceeds 6 months. This is a mandate from the Office of General Counsel and is necessary for us to comply with the Treasury offset and do not pay requirements under federal law. And so we cannot approve forbearance periods that exceed 6 months. And I will just note, we have approved longer ones in the past, but we can do that no longer. But this does not foreclose the possibility of us entertaining rolling 6-month forbearance periods. So go to the next slide. All right, you're going to submit your letters of interest by our deadline. We'll line them up in the order that they were received. We will screen out those LOIs that are incomplete, ineligible, on its face, infeasible, or may include untested technology. We will only finance tested technologies. We won't take technology risk on these projects. So you have to have proven technology. So they will be reviewed and ranked for completeness, and we'll do preliminary financial, technical feasibility, and eligibility screens. Again, the incomplete, unfeasible, ineligible projects will be rejected, and those will be placed in a funding queue. Now, under the funding notice, the administrator has a couple of discretions reserved. One would be, as we discussed earlier, substantially underserved trust area discretion. Among those discretions under the statute is to give highest funding priority to a SUDA. In other words, highest funding priority to a project that serves a substantially underserved trust area, again, which is typically a tribal or indigenous community, indigenous community that's as defined by the SUDA statute and the trail that you have to take in the SUDA statute to be able to identify Alaska Native and Hawaiian homeland eligible entities as well. And then there also reserved for the administrator is the right to take into account geographic diversity. If we get a funding pool that is all concentrated, 99% in the southeast part of the United States, and we've got one or two applications in the northwest corner of the United States, the administrator may say, hey, we got to give those folks in the unfunded areas a chance, so they may jump the line to go above the funding queue. So we will then establish, with the administrator's blessing, a funding queue. We will draw an imaginary line calculating the funds that are requested or that would be offered to those above that funding line. And we will endeavor to ensure that I have no more invitations to proceed than I have dollars available to us. So those that survive this LOI process and this queuing and scoring and ranking of LOIs, those will mature to a invitation to proceed. We'll call them ITPs occasionally. An invitation to proceed is going to be a letter that you would receive that says, congratulations, your LOI seems to be eligible, feasible, and complete. And so you are invited to apply for X amount of dollars, X amount of forgiveness, certain amount of term, and you will be invited to submit a full application to be able to move to the next level of review under this program. So those in the funding queue above the funding cutoff level that have survived the preliminary screening will be invited to proceed to submit a full application, and those invited to proceed will have 60 days to submit their full application. Now, if you fall below the funding line, you might still have a chance if somebody above the funding line drops out or decides not to apply or changes their mind or has a project shrink in size. So you don't have to give up hope, but we want to be careful not to have people expend time and energy on projects that have little likelihood of being funded because we'll run out of money. Next slide, please. All right, environmental reviews. That's a very, very important part of everything we do at the Rural Utilities Service. All part-funded projects must go through environmental review, and RUS must approve that environmental review before you can start construction. If you jump the gun on construction and start constructing before you received environmental review, that's a fast ticket to get your project knocked out for potentially being ineligible. The administrator has the discretionary right to obligate funds conditioned on the completion of a project's environmental review. That is a discretion that the agency has used on a number of occasions, including our Reconnect telecommunications broadband program, which we've had in place since since the middle part of the first Trump administration and carried through the previous administration and is still in effect to this day. And when we did the PACE and New Era projects, they were all obligated subject to the completion of environmental review. The reason we do that is that gets the funds obligated quickly. It also gives our applicants a degree of confidence that if they are able to complete the environmental review, that the funds are set aside for their projects. However, there is a little bit of a catch. The environmental review must be completed before the end of the next fiscal year after the obligation date. So please, as you plan your projects, take the amount of time you would need to complete your environmental review or the complexity of the environmental review for your project into account as you design your projects. And if they're obligated subject to environmental review, you will have until the end of the next fiscal year to be able to complete that environmental review. And construction cannot commence until RUS clears the project for environmental review. No funds will be advanced until the environmental review is complete and cleared. All right, so one more point I want to make on this too. There is a discretionary opportunity which we have exercised in the past. There's no guarantee, it's not a right, there's no guarantee that it would be exercised in the future. But if the clock runs out on the environmental review timeline of projects that are obligated subject to environmental review, the agency has used a technique where we rescind the funds, which is part of the consequence of not meeting that date. And if funds are available and the administrator so determines under the administrator's discretion, the funds could be re-obligated to reset the clock, but you would also get a new loan and grant, loan number, not a grant, a loan and forgiveness number related to that project. But please don't start construction until you've completed your environmental review. One more point here, you could start construction once you complete environmental review, even if we have not completed our underwriting or documentation of your projects. However, you are at complete financial risk related to the expenditure of funds if, for any reason, we do not cross the finish line of having a meeting of minds on the final documentation of the loan agreement. So if you're willing to take the risk 100%, on your own account, you can start your construction. But if we do not reach the finish line in closing our loan agreement, then you're going to be on the hook for all of those expenditures. If we do close the loan agreement, which we will, of course, try to do with every effort possible, then you would be able to submit those costs, eligible costs that were incurred during that construction period as part of your first reimbursement for loan funds. And again, grant funds wait till the project is completed. Unless you're a project loans, loan and grant funds have to wait until the project is completed. Go to the next slide. Now, rolling basis. That's the term in the funding notice. What does that mean? Well, it means that your timestamp matters. LOIs will be reviewed on a rolling basis in the order of their receipt. The administrator reserves the right to take geographic diversity or substantially unserved trust area eligibility into account when establishing the funding queue. In other words, if you're early in the line, you'll have a better shot of getting the funding that is available under this funding notice than if you might be the last in line. However, if you're not first in line, again, you don't have to give up hope because you might be eligible for geographic diversity, or you might be eligible for SUDA discretion. So don't give up hope, but just bear in mind that we will be taking them in the order. One thing I do not know is I do not know who or how many will apply. It could be that I get more applications than I've got dollars available, and then this funding queue becomes really, really critical, or I could get fewer applications than I have funding availability, and then this is kind of a moot point. But your place in the queue is important. That's why we're trying to give you as much advance notice as possible here on what is required. Go to the next slide. All right, let's fast forward to uh, the finish line. You're through your LOI. You've got your invitation to proceed. You filed your full application. It's survived all of our prudent scrutiny. You've got your loans documented and loan agreements approved. So this is a really, really important point. I alluded to it at the get-go of this presentation. Under the Inflation Reduction Act, all part funds must be dispersed well before the end of fiscal year 2031. And loan forgiveness will only be granted for completed performing projects. So they have to be complete, they have to be operational, they have to be validated for you to get the loan forgiveness. So if you miss that loan forgiveness date, let's say your project isn't completed until the end of 2032, well, you're going to miss out on the forgiveness. So please plan your projects appropriately. Only system borrowers are eligible to request loan reimbursement during construction with RUS approval. So it's not a matter of right, it's a matter of discretion. But because we have a lien on all of the assets of our system borrowers, we can make a underwriting decision, a financial decision, to be able to reimburse expenses as they are incurred. However, we will only be reimbursing with loan funds. Grant funds, as we just said, will be saved for the very end. So all awards and funding releases will require do not pay and Treasury offset screenings, and they will be required at multiple times. So every time you draw from your loan, we will be screening for do not pay and Treasury offset. So please be sure to keep up on your data related to do not pay. In other words, make sure that all of your bills to the federal government are paid, whether it's your tax bills or loans that you have, so that you're not on the do not pay list, and make sure that you do not have key employees who are designated part of your leadership team that are on the do not pay list. Or if you have someone who was and got fired, please make sure that you remove them from your organization chart. So we'll go to the next slide. Now, here is the most important thing I need to tell you. This is one of the most important things you can do to prepare for a submission of an LOI in grants.gov to be part of the PART program. You must have a current system for award management registration, which produces for you your unique entity identifier. So you need SAM registration and a UE number. Both of them are not perpetual. They have approximately a 1 year renewal cycle. So please double check, triple check. Make sure that your SAM registration and your UE numbers are current, are up to date, are assigned to the proper person. We have had situations where people have had SAM numbers or UE numbers that were under the control of somebody who no longer works for the applicant. And they lost time in the application process trying to acquire that before the gate closed on applications. So please take my advice here. This is one of the biggest stumbling blocks that the folks at grants.gov told us they encounter, is folks think that they've got everything in place for SAM registration and their UE number, and they go to enter it and they get the buzzer saying, nope, sorry, it's not current. So please double check, triple check, and make sure that you have a SAM and UE. And next slide. Here is our timeline. We posted the NOFO August 3rd, 2026. And then September 8th at 11:59 a.m., the LOI submission window will close. I'm sorry, will open. Excuse me, will open. September 8th, 11:59 a.m., LOI submission window opens, and it will remain open until 11:59 a.m. until October 9th, 2026. No LOIs will be accepted after the LOI window closes. Uh, and high-ranking LOI submitters will be invited to prepare a full application for funding consideration, right? You'll receive a ITP, an invitation to proceed if you are high-ranking and otherwise eligible, feasible, securable, and compliant with all of the rules. And again, like a broken record, all part funds must be dispersed before the end of fiscal year 2031, which is September 30th, 2031. But please note, highlight, underline, emphasize, we will be setting a last day in advance, substantially in advance of the last day of fiscal year 2031, to ensure that funds are dispersed efficiently and well in advance of the statutory deadline. Next slide. So here we are right in the middle. This is the halfway point for our Wednesday webinar deep dives. We will be repeating a very similar program. If we have developed more refinements or more, more issues that we think merit attention based on some of the questions we receive from our potential applicants, we will perhaps add some material as we did today. So there are two more Wednesday webinar deep dives available, the 26th of August and September 2nd. And we're delighted to have you, have your friends, have your family, have your colleagues, have your customers, have your clients join us. We want to have a good response to this funding notice. And now for my favorite part of the program, I'm going to take a sip of water. And I'm going to ask Scott to see if we have any questions, either in the Q&A or any hands up.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. We do have some questions coming in. And side note, I do like the additions to the webinar, like how we keep adding to it. Want to remind folks if they want to raise their virtual hand, they can do so, and they can ask a verbal question to Chris, and we'll try to keep that to a minute or so. I'm going to go back and forth, Chris, from the
Yes.
hands raised and the questions.
Sounds good.
So, for a project that is already in development, may pre-construction activities continue in parallel with the part application and RUS environmental review without affecting eligibility? If so, where does RUS draw the line between permissible development activity and quote commencement of construction or quote ground disturbance for
Yeah.
purposes of the part requirements? And for example, how would RUS view activities such as engineering, equipment, procurement, EPC, contracting, interconnection work, permitting, or other construction commitments?
Yeah, a very, a very good question, a very complicated question, one that I want to reserve the definitive answer to be one that I have properly vetted through the FAQ process, because it involves multiple entities that will be engaged in reviewing the application or the LOI. One of the key elements that you used in your question is pre-construction. There are certain expenses that qualify as pre-construction expenses that would not trigger a problem with our environmental review. And that exact list, some of those items were ones that were listed in your hypothetical question. And what I would like to do is be able to be very careful in that answer, taking my own advice about being cautious that we both understand the form of the question. But you are correct. There could be some pre-construction expenses. Engineering, I think, is a good example. You don't disturb any ground. You're not going to have any potential to affect endangered species or historic preservation sites or burial grounds by just doing an engineering study. So there are some of those expenses. But if a project is already turning ground, is already underway, uh, it's going to be a um, it's going to be a very tricky call to be able to make, and we would need, I think we would need a little bit more information. And I have to be very, very careful here. I should add the disclaimer. I can't be in a position to pre-qualifying anyone through the Q&A process or even the FAQ process. These are more generic questions, and they're very thought-provoking and intended to provide guidance. So we'll be tackling that one with a little more specificity. I think at least attempt to tackle it in the FAQ process.
Sure. Thank you, Chris. Would a cooperative-owned behind-the-meter battery program be eligible for part if the cooperative retains ownership and operational control of the batteries, installs them at member premises, and charges participating members a monthly lease or program fee?
Okay. Again, a lot of specifics in that question. So consumer-owned behind-the-meter investments would not be eligible. The tricky part is a utility-owned behind-the-meter investment. I believe if it is utility-owned, I think we want to make sure. I want to double-check that possibility. But if the customer, I can clearly say if the consumer, if your member consumer is the owner of the battery, that would not be eligible because the behind-the-meter customer premises equipment would not be eligible. I want to be very, very careful to make sure that I answer that question too. So that's another one I would like to take in for our next round of FAQs, because
Sure.
I do not want to misspeak on that point about whether it's utility owned behind the meter.
Got it. Thank you, Chris. So for battery energy storage projects, either existing or new BESS to be built, how much of that charging energy has to be supplied by solar or wind? For example, assume we have a 10 megawatt of solar already existing, but we want to build network of distributed BESS for rural co-ops. Can we show existing sites and ability to now build more solar?
Yeah, no, well, these are very good questions. Now, there are a couple of different ways to interpret what that question is. So let me start with the clearest statement, which I don't think is implied in your question, but it could be heard as to imply in your question. We will not be able to finance wind or solar new generation, whether there's a battery attached to it or not. The wind or solar part comes in that the battery needs to be charged by a renewable energy resource, which could be wind, solar, geothermal, biomass, or hydro. So any of those five.
Hmm.
So if you would like to use the part program to deploy new battery or other storage devices, and let's say you've got 10 megawatts of solar coming off of one of your projects, and you want to charge a 10 megawatt battery with that solar energy, well, then that battery could be eligible.
Thank you.
So we will not be financing wind or solar new construction, even if it has a battery attached to it, but a battery charged by wind or solar could be eligible for part finance.
Got it. Thank you. Can a state-owned power utility apply for part as opposed to a municipal power utility?
Sure, a state. I mean, I would say that a state, like in my home state of Nebraska, has public power districts. Public power districts are you have the Nebraska Public Power District, then you have regional Omaha Public Power District, Lincoln Public Power District. Those are creations of the state. They are municipal utilities in our view. So that would be like again, an operating utility that is owned by a state or local authority, that's in our view a municipal utility, and that could be an eligible applicant, provided it's for eligible purpose and eligible service territory.
Great. Great. Thank you. So I'm going to go over to the phone lines and I'm going to ask, we have a couple of hands raised. I'm going to ask
Okay.
Daniel to go ahead and unmute himself, and then Chelsea, you'll be up next. Okay. So Daniel, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, sir. And if you're looking for that mute button, it should be in the lower left-hand corner. Okay, Daniel, we'll come back to you if you want to put that hand back up. We'll come back to you. But we're going to go ahead and ask Chelsea to put herself off mute, and then Robin, you'll be next.
Hi, thank you all. I have a question regarding a Brownsfield site. So, for any new project located on a Brownsfield, which will already be, previously disturbed, cleared, and graded, what RUS environmental review is still required, or would that project still qualify?
Oh, well, so if you have again, I'm going to parse your sentence a little bit and to try to be precise. So if you have a brownfield site that, again, doesn't have energy on it, or so you could make new investment at that site, right? And we would want to make sure, though, the whole thing has to, the whole thing has to be considered, right? It's not a free pass because it's a brownfield site because it's previously disturbed, right? It needs to be we need to be able to look at the project site and water use, all of the criteria to be able to meet not only the National Environmental Policy Act requirements, but also Endangered Species Act, Historic Preservation Act. There's about 20 different environmental regulations or statutes that do require some attention. One of the best pieces of advice I can give you is to one, if you were to receive an invitation to proceed, well, that is the point of time where you want to aggressively engage with our environmental historic preservation team to be able to start the environmental review. We don't expect you to have environmental review completed before you submit your LOI because you don't know if you're going to get funded or not. But once you get that invitation to proceed, there's you kind of move up the likelihood scale
Was
of
there
funding.
I have a follow-up to that. Would there
Mhm.
be a way that it would operate in parallel since some of the environmental review has already been underway?
So that is something that you would need to discuss with the environmental team because we do have procedures where we're able to be a cooperating agency with another federal agency that is conducting an environmental review at the site, or we have the ability in some cases to be able to adopt another agency's environmental review. But we do have to compare and coordinate that against our own environmental regulation. And one important note I should make on the environmental side is so those of you who went through the PACE program or familiar with the PACE program, since that program has closed, the United States Department of Agriculture has adopted a new departmental environmental reg and has replaced our mission area environmental reg under 7 CFR 1970. So 7 CFR 1970 is no longer operational, and that's replaced with 7 CFR 1B, which is now a departmental environmental reg. And there have been some changes to ease some of the burdens and to make some quicker decisions. So you would need to be able to consult. We want to be able, to the extent you're engaging in an environmental review with another federal agency, it is in your interest to at least touch base with our team so that those efforts can be coordinated so you don't have to do the same thing twice.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good question.
Thank you, Chelsea. Thank you, Chris. I'm gonna go ahead and okay, and I do want to be respectful of folks' time. We have about 3 minutes. Chris, it's up to you if you want to go a little bit over. I can stay for
Yeah.
maybe
If
an extra five
Sure,
or
if
10.
if we can squeeze in a question, or if someone wants to ask a question, that we're happy to take it.
All right, thank you. So, Robin, I'm gonna go ahead. You can go ahead and ask your question.
Uh, This is Robin Michael. If the operating utility serves some areas that are SUDA qualified, but some are not, what needs to be demonstrated to qualify for SUDA consideration?
Well, they would have to demonstrate which of those areas are SUDA eligible. And then because SUDA is discretionary with the administrator, SUDA can then make that determination. The administrator can make that determination. So uh, take a look at the again, take a look at the regulation. I'm sorry, the SUDA statute. The SUDA statute will lead you to a regulation and another regulation, and there's pretty decent mapping available for SUDA areas in the lower 48, but you're going to have to, I think, rely on the definitions in those, kind of follow the rabbit trail uh, in the SUDA statute that leads you to definitions that are in the Alaska Claims Act, and also definitions that kind of include things like Hawaiian homelands.
But
So
once we pursue that rabbit trail and we determine that not all of the service area qualifies for SUDA,
disclose that, and then it'll be taken into under consideration. And
okay,
it could be it could be that depending on where that application falls in the funding queue, it could be maybe the SUDA application, the SUDA eligible areas could advance. A lot depends on the specifics of the application. Is this application independent on each other? But again, that SUDA eligibility is again at the discretion of the administrator. There's no guarantee that it'll be exercised, but it is available. So if you have a mixed application, disclose it. Let us know what areas are SUDA eligible, what areas might not be. And we will double check to make sure. All right,
Thank
very
you.
good.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Robin. So we are right at the 3:30 mark, Chris. I don't know if you want to wrap up or if you wanted to take one more hand raise. We can.
Well, if you have a hand raise, I will take one more hand raise and then I will wrap up.
Okay, we actually have two, but like I said, I want to
Okay,
make
we
sure.
can, if they're quick, we can squeeze them in.
All right, we're gonna squeeze in two raised hands. Mary, if I can ask you to unmute yourself, and then Ruben, you'll be up next.
Hi, can you guys hear me all right?
Yes,
Loud
ma'am.
and clear.
Wonderful. Thank you. This has been immensely helpful. If I understood you correctly, upgrades to existing linear facilities are eligible to the extent that they facilitate delivery of power from a qualifying generation or storage project to the off-taker. The NOFO lists transformers as an illustrative example, but I want
Yep.
to confirm that such upgrades could feasibly include grid enhancing technologies or GETs. Again, to the extent they alleviate delivery constraints on existing infrastructure to kind of help enable that overall project.
Okay, so when you're saying where it gets like, for example, a higher capacity transmission line,
Yeah, so any sort of hardware or software systems,
sure.
for example, dynamic line readings that are aimed at, improving capacity, efficiency, or reliability of existing infrastructure.
Right. So what we gave you is an illustrative list. So if you can demonstrate to us that the linear investments from the generation source to the off-taker is needed to, and I think you could make a decent case that, well, this will get more of the power to the off-taker than if we don't make that investment, right? Then that could potentially be an eligible purpose. I don't want to pre-qualify just like with a blanket statement, but I do think you do have the right idea in mind, is that if that enhances your delivery to your off-taker, you're getting more power from your point of origination to your point of destination, then that could be a legitimate linear upgrade. And allow me to give you a little commercial about an upcoming program if you happen to be a cooperative. We are poised to announce soon, I hope later this summer, a program that is a follow-on to the New Era program, and it's going to be focused on two key purposes. Now, it's limited by statute to cooperatives, like the New Era program was, but it'll be focused on financing nuclear power, as well as financing transmission enhancements and reconductoring. So please put that on your summer NOFO wish list. That'll be coming out, we hope, once we get to the other side of the application window for this program. So thank you, Mary. That's a good question. Again, take a look at the NOFO, and I think if it helps the project, if it's needed for the project, it potentially could be eligible.
Wonderful. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. All right. Our last hand raised, last question we'll be taking today, sir. I'm going to ask Ruben to go ahead and unmute himself. Oh, and okay, Ruben. I'm going to ask
Are you there, Ruben? There he is. Ruben.
Hello, sir. Can you hear us?
Well,
we're having some.
Sorry, Ruben, we can't hear you.
Yep. So Ruben, yep. Okay. You should be off mute, sir, if you want to go ahead and give it one more try. If not, while we wrap up, I'd ask you if you want to put your question in the Q&A. We will make sure to have that noted.
Yeah, thank you, Ruben. I'm sorry we can't hear you, but let me bring this session in for a landing and thank everybody who has participated in today's webinar. And I want to thank my colleagues at Rural Utility Service who have helped make these webinars so informative and so helpful and carefully researched. So we look forward to many of you becoming part of Rural America's Energy Future. So thank you very much for spending some time with us today. We've got 2 more webinars ahead of us. Again, you're welcome to rejoin us or get your friends and colleagues to join us. Thank you very much. Have a great day. Talk to you all later. Bye-bye.